Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. Getting all our uploads in here today. The first day, the maiden voyage of Musings of a Middling. Today, in addition to playing with ChatGPT, I'm going to give you some thoughts on the first couple chapters of G.K. Chesterton's Heretics. We're looking at chapters 1 through 3. Alright, so I was reading this yesterday. Chesterton's great. If you haven't read some Chesterton, you need to read some Chesterton, especially if you already like Lewis, you already like Tolkien. A lot of the same types of ideas come up, I think. There's a lot of connections. He reminds me a lot of Lewis. So, my volume here is the Lexham Classics edition of both works. All right. It came out in 2017, and the original books were published in 1905 and 1908, respectively, if memory serves. And I'm just going to go through a couple of things that I marked up as I was reading this yesterday, just real quick. Just a couple things that stuck out to me as I was reading the first three chapters. And again, we're talking about G.K. Chesterton's 1905 work, Heretics. So the idea behind these books really is that he's going to outline a couple of his quibbles. They seem like quibbles, but they're really deep and they're types of things that I would like to complain about, but obviously Chesterton's way smarter than I am. But he just talks about some of his contemporaries, some other literary critics, other figures at the time in turn of the century, England and Europe, that he's going to take issue with, and he's going to say that they're, you know, deviants away from traditional Christianity and traditional Christian views, especially the more liturgical and traditional churches, makes them heretics. And then he's going to write a companion piece to basically his view on all these things and what right belief should look like, right? So he doesn't use heretic in the typical term, in the typical sense, I guess, but he kind of does. So anyway, my copy, this 2017 Lexham Classics copy, if you want to follow my pagination here, page 6. Here's a quote that is something that I like to harp about. So here's the quote from Chesterton. General ideas used to dominate literature. Excuse me, I'm going to start over. General ideals used to dominate literature. They've been driven out by the cry of art for art's sake. General ideals used to dominate politics. They've been driven out by the cry of efficiency, which may roughly be translated as politics for politics' sake. Persistently, for the last 20 years, the ideals of order or liberty have dwindled in our books. The ambitions of wit and eloquence have dwindled in our parliaments. Literature has purposely become less political. Politics have purposely become less literary. General theories of the relation of things have thus been extruded from both, and we are in a position to ask, what have we gained or lost by this extrusion? Is literature better? Is politics better for having discarded the moralist and the philosopher? Here's something I harp on all the time. I think he's just spot on, as he typically is. Everyone's a hyper specialists now. Everyone only knows their fields. Politicians just learn political science. Philosophers just read philosophy. Historians just read history. Far worse, STEM types. They just, and part of it's understandable, right? Because to be competent in a STEM field anymore, you need like 12 years of specialized education. You don't have time to learn anything else. But as a result, everyone just reads within their small little window, right? And the people that read widely and out of their discipline, it seems so rare, and that just doesn't seem like a good thing. Try to think of a real polymath alive today, right? Think back to, 15, 16, 1700s, right? Or way earlier than that. Think of all the polymaths you could name then, true polymaths, but not so much anymore. You guys still like the sheet? You guys having a good time with that? Yeah. Maybe we'll get the steamer and we'll get some wrinkles out of it for next time. But okay. So moving on. Yeah, that's Chesterton on everyone just being hyper specialized, and yeah, I'm with them. I agree. It's good to read out of your comfort zone and be a little bit more well-rounded. All right, let's see what my next note in here was. Looks like it's gonna be on page 9. Yeah, this is just the way that Chesterton deals with his interlocutors, his opponents, his friends. Right, he was friends with George Bernard Shaw, but um, you know, Chesterton's funny too. Like he has a way of complimenting these guys, and in these chapters that he writes about them, when he targets Kipling or Shaw or Wells, I think I already said Wells, Shaw, Kipling, he's gonna go on for like maybe 4 pages about how much he likes them and like how great they are and how smart they are and how they've advanced their respective fields, mostly in literary criticism and literature. Um, but and then he's going to do all that before he critiques them. But then he's also really funny, and he's just like, yeah, I have correct beliefs, and they don't, and I can spot correct beliefs when I see them. So here's the quote on page 9. This is Chesterton speaking. I am not concerned with Mr. Bernard Shaw as one of the most brilliant and one of the most honest men alive. I am concerned with him as a heretic, that is to say, a man whose philosophy is quite solid, quite coherent, and quite wrong. It's just funny. Like he can just say it with that much clarity. He's like, yeah, this guy's a genius, really advancing the field, real consistent guy, consistent application of his principles, but he's wrong. He's a heretic, and it's like, I don't know, it's just kind of funny. It's no one writes that directly. I think back then, but especially now, especially someone prominent. It's fun. All right, next we're gonna go to page 12. He's talking here about how banal in our culture is, in our society is. Everything's so sanitary and clean, and there's no room for romanticism or mysticism or really anything higher ordered, right? We just have to have a materialistic explanation for everything. So here's a quote here on that topic. Doubtless there are other objections which can be urged without unreason against the influence of gods and visions in morality, whether in the cell, he's speaking of a monastic cell, or street. But this advantage the mystic morality must always have. It is always jollier. A young man may keep himself from vice by continually thinking of disease. He may keep himself from it also by continually thinking of the Virgin Mary. There may be question about which method is more reasonable, or even about which is more efficient, but surely there can be no question about which is more wholesome. Yeah, so if you're going to live a chaste life, live a decent sexual life, right? Should you be living chastely because you're afraid of some STD, or it's just purely for health reasons and you're just terrified of this horrible thing that could happen? Or maybe meditate on the Blessed Virgin, right? Isn't that a little bit more beautiful, a little bit more wholesome to get the same result? So even when modernity can produce the same result, it's so shallow and it doesn't have the beauty to it. Okay. Going to the next, we're going to look at page 19 and 20. Pages 19 and 20. And this is from the chapter 3, titled On Mr. Rudyard Kipling and Making the World Small. Okay. He talks about Smiths. It's really interesting. He's just saying, oh yeah, if I say I'm going to write a story called Mr. Smith or the Smith family, you're just going to, roll your eyes back in your soul because this is just going to be so boring. Like, it's just such a common name. It has to be a common story. And he goes, no. Everything in this world is so deep and things are meaningful. Just think about it for a second. Just pause and think. What is a Smith? Well, here's what he says. In the case of Smith, the name is so poetical that it must be an arduous and heroic matter for the man to live up to it. The name of Smith is the name of the one trade that even kings respected. It could claim half the glory of the arma virumque, which all epics acclaimed. That was rough Latin, right? Yikes, sorry. Okay, anyway, carrying on. The spirit of the smithy is so close to the spirit of song that it is mixed in a million poems, and every blacksmith is a harmonious blacksmith. Then he goes on to talk about the creative destruction that is the blacksmith and fire and hammering, and you just get this beautiful thing at the end. And that's when someone's last name Smith, that's what's referencing. Their ancestors were probably blacksmiths. And everyone's fascinated by blacksmiths. Blacksmiths are cool. And, right here, big Tolkien guy, dwarves. I love dwarves. Dwarves are so cool. And he's saying that's all tied up, that creative destruction, that beauty, that noble profession that everyone respected because it's inherently cool, but it's so practical and you need it, and even kings respected it. That's when someone's Mr. Smith. That's what they're laying claim to. And then he lays into Rudyard Kipling and critiques him. I think he names two of his heroes in his novels, right? Elmer Valence and Vernon Raymond, or Vernon Ramond. So again, haven't read any Kipling really, maybe a couple poems here and there. So I could be saying that wrong, and those might not be his characters. But that's what Chesterton goes on to talk here, and he goes, I'll just read it here. Okay. Yet our novelists call their hero Elmer Valence, which means nothing, or Vernon Ramond, which means nothing, when it is in their power to give him the sacred name of Smith, this name made of iron and flame. So he's saying, yeah, so you're going to laugh at Smith because it's a common name. Well, at least that has a meaning. Now people are just, to sound fancy, they're going to just make up some name, and it doesn't map onto reality, so it's goofy. So yeah, I think Chesterton's kind of saying here, pay attention to the small things. There's a lot of meaning in them, but also, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Like, you don't need to just make up names just because they sound cool, and you're just pretentious, and it's not nearly as cool anyway. All right. Yeah, it's just kind of interesting. Like, I never even really made the connection there. Like, oh yeah, Smith. I guess that would be smithing, and I think blacksmithing's super interesting. So, yeah, very, very, very amateur at that. I've made like a little rebar knife once, and I've cast some aluminum, and maybe we'll do some videos about that someday. But it never went well. But it's interesting. A little bit of metal shop in high school was kind of fun. In after school, we made battle bots. It was a good time. But anyway, all right. Page 22. He's going to critique what he sees as a kind of celebration of militarism and discipline and order, kind of the Prussian spirit, in Rudyard Kipling. Quote, this is page 22 of my volume, quote, now, Mr. Kipling is certainly wrong in his worship of militarism, but his opponents are generally speaking quite as wrong as he. The evil of militarism is not that it shows certain men to be fierce and haughty and excessively warlike. The evil of militarism is that it shows most men to be tame and timid and excessively peaceable. The professional soldier gains more and more power as the general courage of the community declines. Thus the Praetorian Guard became more and more important in Rome, as Rome became more and more luxurious and feeble. The military man gains the civil power in proportion as the civilian loses the military virtues. And as it was in ancient Rome, so it is in contemporary Europe. There never was a time when nations were more militarist. There was never a time when men were less brave. All ages and all epochs have sung of arms and the man, but we have effected simultaneously the deterioration of the man and the fantastic perfection of the arms. Militarism demonstrated the decadence of Rome, and it demonstrates the decadence of Prussia. End quote. So yeah, wow. So he's saying in ancient Rome, right, is when there was the era of the citizen soldier, right, where they go on campaigning season, but they were really farmers. They were Romans. It was civic virtue. It wasn't a professional army. That's when Rome was kind of at its for their own view, like they look back at that period and they're like, wow. And even now we can go see, oh, there really was a little bit more virtue in that period. So when the big empire, right, way more, decadent, it was huge, right? But when it's just that city state or maybe just the Italian peninsula and they were taking on Carthage, right? You think that period after the Carthaginian War, it's almost like the 1950s in the United States. You're coming off of back-to-back wars against your rival, you defeated your rival, and now you're just there. You're on top of the world. Then a couple hundred years sets in, the civilian starts to offload courage and discipline and all of that to another class of people, and so then that class of people takes that on, and the common civilians don't have to. Um, and then Chesterton goes on after that to talk about how really Kipling's it's just about the order and the discipline and the industrial efficiency of it. But for Chesterton, any sort of military virtue that he's going to praise, it's going to be courage and romanticism. And you can see that, I'm sure, if you would put some Kipling up beside something like Lepanto that Chesterton wrote. Now, if you want some romanticism and talking about courage in battle, you got to read Lepanto. It's a short poem by Chesterton, and it's incredible. So you gotta check it out. I'm gonna link in the show notes to a video breaking down Lepanto by G.K. Chesterton, line by line, talking about the annotations and historical references. And then also I have to recommend you, and I'm also going to link this, Comavi de Profundis. Might have pronounced that wrong, but it's this wonderful YouTube channel or Spotify. They make music. They make some Catholic chant music. They make a lot of literary music, so they do some Tolkien stuff and they put it to song. And they're just an incredible channel. I have to give them a huge shout out. All right, so I think that's all I had here on Chesterton. So we looked at how there's no polymaths anymore. We looked at how he's funny and direct. We looked at that SCD versus the Blessed Virgin Mary thing. It's like, okay, which one is a better way to get to chastity, right? Which one's going to be more beautiful, really, even if they have the same result? Then we talked about don't scoff at common things. The world's inherently meaningful. Smith. Don't scoff at Smith. Smith's pretty cool. And then we talked about military virtue, talked about Prussia, talked about some of Chesterton's quibbles with Rudyard Kipling on the matter. And yeah, in that critique of the Prussian spirit, right? I know everyone knew that Prussia was kind of a militarist power at the time, but I don't know, 1905, seeing that maybe Prussia wasn't going to be going in a good way, yeah, called that one too, Chesterton. So always like when people seem like they're ahead of the curve and see things happen long before they do. All right, guys, take it easy. Hope you have a great day. Thanks for visiting the channel. We'll see you in the next one, and maybe eventually we'll get rid of this sheet. All right, take care.